that I lost my capacity to feel. So anything great happened, didn't feel anything. Terrible things happened, didn't feel anything. Like I was just like flatlined emotionally. And as someone who has, a history of experiencing the full gamut of emotions, I felt nothing. And that was a real red flag for me.
So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Andre, for spending your time and sharing your long story short with me.
Mm.
And I just want to say big up to Dr. Ava Brown for connecting us two together. Do you get what I mean? And also, the other connection is, do you want to share what the other connection is?
Well, then from your brother from another mother?
No,
Which one?
Aisha.
Oh, 𝘂𝗵𝗂𝗋𝗃. Yeah. 100%. Now we're connected all over the shop
Oh
at the
my,
moment. It was bound to happen.
it was bound to happen, man. Seriously. And that's I love. It's like, when you've got an idea, but you just have the idea and just how it unfolds is just absolutely marvelous. I'm
Mm.
just so happy.
Organic.
I'm organic. That's the one. I'm not forcing nothing, not pushing, but things are just coming and I'm just, yeah, it's just a good time.
That is
So
it.
I am excited that you're on the podcast and you will be talking about your long story short and everything. And I'm just excited. And I know that this episode will resonate with so many because of the
Mm,
topic as well. And also how you not how you and also how your story would resonate with others. Okay. So
mm.
um I just want to firstly start off with introducing yourself. Do you know what I mean? Because I've got your lovely bio here. I am not going to read your bio. Do you know what I mean? I think
Got
it's
you.
so lovely for people to share who they are in their own language and tone and everything. So, who is Andre Bright?
That is a big question. I think that's different to what do I do, right? So who is Andre Bright? I was on another podcast recently and I answered by saying I'm curious, I'm creative, and I'm compassionate. I think that was how I responded. I think as a person, I read this book actually. What's it called? Solve for Happy by 𝘁𝗀𝗋. And he talked about how at your core, you don't change. There's certain elements of you that is true to who you are. And it isn't tied to the things you do, your achievements and stuff like that. And I really reflected on that question. And I think I have come to that conclusion that I am curious, I'm creative, and I'm compassionate. But what I do at the moment is I'm an executive coach. I'm a burnout prevention coach. So I help businesses and individuals tackle this stress issue. And it's rooted in so many different things. It's mental, it's emotional, it's physiological, it's psychological. And it shows up in different ways. There's different causes. And I think the more I do it, the bigger I see this amorphous idea that is burnout. And there's so many ways for me to help people. Like there's one client who I'm working through procrastination because when he procrastinates, it builds up this tension within him and it's really based on fear. And that fear is basically what we're aiming at clearing out, ways to reframe and stuff. And I really enjoy that process of helping people go from block to freedom, really. I'm also an architect. So I design buildings for a living. And that's mainly that idea about form and function. So what does it look like, but how do people use the space? And then I'm also a professional dancer, right? So those three things put together. And I remember once someone asking me, what's the link between architecture and dance? And the way I said it was, I feel like architecture is how the space affects the person and dance is how the person affects the space. So it's like how we move through it and how we interact with our environment and each other. And with coaching, I get to do a little bit of both. I get to look at how you as an individual traverse this world, and how we perceive things, how we translate things into like our inner meaning. But then I also look at, sometimes it's the environment that's causing us the stress, right? So it's like, what impact does the environment have on us, the people we're around, that kind of thing.
Wow, 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 wow. Because you actually stole one of my questions here. Because
Oh,
one of the questions that I was going to ask you was about what is a link between dance, and I want to know what form of dance that you do,
mm,
to your burnout coach work. Do you know what I mean? And also the
yes.
architecture. I want to know how they are all interlinked.
Yeah. Do you know, this is the way I would say it. Because with my coaching practice, although I'm like, I work with corporate as well nowadays. So, but I do bring both sides of myself, like the architecture, which is more of the left side of the brain, that logical, structural side. And then the dance, which is like the right hand side of the brain. It's like the creative, the ideas and the intuition side. So if we're in a session, whether it's with a group or with an individual, I will use creative techniques, because sometimes you can't find the words for it. Like, if you wake up in the morning, you just feel off, and someone asks you, like, what are you feeling? You can't find a word for it. And I realize sometimes it's one, because there's not one word that would sum up everything you're feeling. It's usually a combination of words. And two, sometimes a color or a weather form or something like that might be easier to communicate. Maybe it's a number, I'm like an 8, or I'm a 4 today, or actually I feel like a cloud, today. I feel like hazel blue, it's hazel, something like that. Like there might be something that, or, that also
Yeah, yeah,
might be
that's me.
exactly. There might be, no better word that might sum up how you're feeling. And so I use dance sometimes as an expression. We hold a lot in our bodies. You probably read the book, The Body Keeps Score, right? So in terms of how trauma is kept within the body, also joy is kept there as well. And sometimes it's like we need to express it outwardly. I had a client, and this, I'm only saying this because it was so recent, literally like a couple of days ago. And she was saying how, when things happen, she's an overthinker. And so a lot of the pressure that she places on herself finds herself in her body, and it shows up in certain chronic illnesses and stuff like that. And I said, oh, so um, how do you overthink over the positives? And she was like, what would be the point of that? And I was like, well, there's no point in the negative, because it's coming out with all these negative effects in the body. How about we try the positive and we celebrate it, and we overthink about what could go right? And what would that feel like? What would that look like, in terms of a movement, or like, in terms of a part of the house that you would stand in, where in the room do you feel that feeling the most? Things like that. So yeah, I use the dance, like the physical body side of things, movement, that kind of thing, and the structure. It's like, okay, let's plan this out. Let's break this down into the simplest form. Like, what is it that we're really dealing with? And that's how they all kind of link together for me.
That's so interesting how I love speaking to people. Quite so interesting to hear how one's brain works. Do you know what I mean? So
Mm.
what form of dance is it?
So for I call it movement now. I trained in do you know, it's interesting. My journey with anything has never been a straight line.
Love it.
So I started dance in uni because a friend of mine was a dancer, and he was doing aeronautical engineering. I was doing architectural engineering, but he'd been to Pineapple, and he had this whole Michael Oladele, he now goes by the name Bagsy, right? And so my first experience of dance was helping him teach it. So I went into the deep end, and I just had to pick it up on the spot. And so it was mainly street dance, so popping, locking, hip hop, house, breaking. And we had loads of different things happen. We went to 𝘀𝗵𝗂𝗶𝘀, which is like the biggest dance competition of its type at the time. And we entered because it was cheaper to enter than it was to watch. That was the logic, and I also got to be on that side of the rope, you know what I mean? So when I'm on that side, it meant that I was with all these people I'd seen on TV, and I've always done like the shortest route from A to B. But then in 2017, I had a trip to Senegal, which pretty much changed my life, I'd say. Alessandra Soutin put on an event called Dance Afrique, and they brought these facilitators, these dancers from around the world and the continent of Africa, brought them to Senegal for a 2 week intensive. And it was like 9 o'clock till about 6 o'clock with maybe an hour break in between. And you're constantly doing Sabah, you're doing Pansula, you're doing all these dance styles from around Africa. And that changed the way I looked at movement. So one of the beautiful things about it was it wasn't just technique, it was the spiritual side of things as well, the cultural side. So we got to understand where these dances came from, you know, the connection with the body and the cosmos, for example, and how we, you know, different tribes and stuff use movement to heal themselves from physiological pain, mental pain, emotional trauma, that kind of thing. And it changed the way I looked at it. So now I just call it movement because, you know, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Uganda, South Africa, wherever I go, I try to pick up a little bit of the local dances. And when I dance, a little bit of it, that comes out from any of those countries. So yeah, I just call it movement now.
Movement. And when I was listening to you, I'm also thinking about what you said, that in terms of your expertise in dance and architecture, you bring that within your facilitatory work with regards to clients who, corporate clients who are going through burnout. But I also want
Mm.
to know, what are your early beginnings? Where was you, where did you grow up?
Yeah. So do you know what? When I was in Senegal, there was this moment where anybody who would be listening to this who was there will laugh because they know exactly what's coming. We had 40 different people, right? And we stood in a circle and we introduced ourselves on the first day. And you had to say, my name is so and so from so and so country. Something in the earth, like
Yeah.
something in the ground came up through my feet and just empowered me. And I was like, I'm André Bright from Sierra Leone. And I bellowed it with bass and looked at every one of them before coming back. And everyone was like, what just happened? And that was like a real shift for me. So I was born in Sierra Leone. And for people who don't know, that's in West Africa. That is so Guinea on one side, Liberia on the other side. Beautiful country. We've got beaches for days. It's where number two beach is where the old Bounty adverts were filmed. And it's just we've got so much history. I was born in Freetown, which is named because that was where the first people who were freed from slavery were. And we kind of created a colony, which we call the Creoles, which I'm a descendant of. So the Creoles themselves, we tend to be fairer skin, I guess, and we tend to be, you can't identify us because we're technically, if you go far back enough, from anywhere in Africa. And random fact as well about Sierra Leone, just because I found this out and I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Hamlet by Shakespeare, the first time it was performed was in Sierra Leone. And basically, there was this voyage, this ship that was going past Sierra Leone on the way to India. And the ship's captain was like, okay, we need to stop off. We need to get lemon because people were suffering from scurvy, etc. But they needed an exercise to keep them active. So they performed Hamlet to the Mende people of Sierra Leone as part of this exchange of lemons and fruits and all that kind of stuff. But random fact for you. But yeah,
That's
I'm Sierra
what
Leonean through and
facts,
through.
seriously. Yeah, it's nice to implement some history into this. Do you know what I mean? So you were
100%.
born in Sierra Leone,
Mm.
and then what, came to Britain at what age?
Yeah, so I came to UK at 5 years old. So my mom was doing her PhD in hydrogeology, and we came here to Birmingham randomly. Yeah. But it was also 1990, which means that we had a civil war that started in 1991 to 2001. So it was like 10 years where we couldn't really go back. So by the time that civil war was over, we kind of come here now, like, you know, so it took a long time to start coming back. It was only really in 2016 I started to come back regularly, but now I go back every December. So yeah, since then I've been in UK. And one of the funny things about transition, and I guess it's one of these things where perspective and narrative shifts over time is we downsized coming to UK. So when we're in Sierra Leone, we were the middle class of Sierra Leone at that time was like the upper class here. Like we have access to, you've got the driver, you've got the house help who cooks and cleans, you've got a couple of cars, and you've got a compound, and you build the house yourself, and you own the land, and all this kind of stuff. And then you come to England, where your whole apartment is the size of an old living room, and you speak better English than the people who you're in school with, but they're talking about, fetching water from wells and, flies on your face and stuff. And I'm like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Like, I remember laughing at them because I was like, man, these people have great imagination. Like I was completely baffled. And it was only when I started to pay attention to like aid adverts and stuff that I was like, oh snap, this is the only thing people would have seen about my continent. And even as a child, I was very conscious of that as a narrative. But yeah, fortunately, I was born in Sierra Leone and had that lived experience, so I could counter the narrative that I was receiving elsewhere.
Mhm. I love that you shared that because I think it's so important. Well, for my upbringing, my mum, from the age of 9, I was back and forth Jamaica and also Canada. And I was
Mm,
also able to have a wonderful experience of what it is to go to the Caribbean and what it is like. So when I was growing up in the UK, I had such a strong sense of self.
mm,
Understand?
mm,
I had African and Caribbean art in the house, you know,
mm,
and from a young age was exposed to literature, about civil
mm,
rights, etc. Do you know what I mean? So I'm so glad that you pointed that out because yes, I've had conversations, throughout the years about the portrayal, the
mm.
incorrect portrayal of Africa. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I'm so glad that now the narrative has totally changed, and it is a beautiful, beautiful, rich continent.
it really is.
I've been to Ghana and
Mm.
South Africa, yet to visit Sierra Leone. Okay.
Don't worry, I'm working on it. The thing is, we're doing all sorts back home. Like I'm doing a lot of workshops with corporate leadership training, and we're doing there's like a national storytelling festival, which is like a cultural heritage event that I do. And there's just a lot of stuff I do back home, and I'm getting to the stage where now I've got a partnership with a hotel. So I'm looking at bringing retreats so I can bring people over there because I think we're still at the stage where people don't know about Sierra Leone, which is perfect because it means the beaches are still clean. It means that you still have access to certain things. I think the moment where people actually realize about Sierra Leone and how good it is, a lot will change. And it's funny about what you said about having paintings on your wall, etc. I did a white paper with African History Project and the Africa Center, and it was called what was it called? The Pan African Citizenship, I think we called it. And the idea was how to bring Africa into your lifestyle so that you feel connected to it. And we were just looking at different points you can do that. Things like paintings, things like the music, things like the food, but then also visiting. There's nothing that can beat that. Like if you want to change a narrative, lean into it, actually see for yourself. And Sierra Leone is a good example of that. We have 10 years of civil war. We've got Ebola crisis. We've got landslides and stuff, which is in our past, but that's the only story that's still told. But if you speak to people who actually visit, that's the last thing on their minds. They'll tell you about the people, the kindness, the food, the smells, the music, the environment, the beaches, the Takugama chimpanzee sanctuary, the waterfalls, all this kind of stuff. Um, yeah, so being there is better than anything.
I love that you shared with me that you go there often, um,
Mm,
and I want to then pivot into burnout, and I want to pivot
yes.
into your story and burnout because for me, I understand the importance of rest, and but it's
Mm,
taken me a journey to get there and a journey to say no. You understand? Not now.
mm, mm.
Um, but now older and wiser type of thing along the journey, I am into self-preservation. So I don't feel no
Mm,
way in saying no, not now. And also taking time out, as you said, going abroad, doing what you need to do to recuperate and replenish. What is
Mm.
your story with regards to burnout?
Do you know what? There's a couple of things that for anyone who's not familiar with burnout, I think would need to know. And one of the things that for me has become really important to distinguish is the difference between rest and recovery. Because the thing is, I think a lot of people take time for rest if they can, right? But they don't necessarily recover. So, for example, if you sleep, right, it's only when you come into REM sleep that your body really actually goes into recovery mode. So it's the deep sleep that your body starts healing and things like that. It's the same thing with burnout. We can take the time off and take a weekend to go to somewhere, or take a week to go to, Paris or like Mexico and all this kind of stuff. But then we come back and on day one, we're stressed again, which means that we haven't really had a chance to recover. And I feel like my burnout story starts from realizing that I've done a lot of focus on rest, but not recovery. And so I would do a lot of, so for example, I would do loads of projects. So I'm a full-time architect at this time. Yeah, I was doing festivals in Sierra Leone. I was doing dance, theater, and creating it and touring it and all this kind of stuff. And I would do all these side missions to this game of life. And then when I would take time off, it would literally just be to do another project. Yeah. So, and if I did rest, it would be like for a day or an afternoon, and then it would be in the form of a nap. But what I didn't do, which would have been recovery, is actually reflect and introspect on what is causing these habits, for example. What could I do to break these cycles? So when it comes to rest, like, am I just having like an hour, or am I creating the environment to be able to allow myself to fall into deep sleep so I can recover? If I'm doing anything with my body, am I doing like just a 15-minute workout in the morning, or I'm actually paying attention to what my body needs, what kind of movement my body needs, what kind of food my body needs to heal and be strong and all this kind of stuff. I wasn't being reflective and introspective on that. And I was very much in the doing state of life. So I was very much action, I've got this idea, let's launch it tomorrow, all that kind of stuff.
Not even
Yeah.
like 6 months or a year down the road, but tomorrow.
Tomorrow. I kid you not. My one of my first businesses, Become Immersive, started at 3 o'clock in the morning because I woke up with this idea. And by about 7 o'clock in the morning, I'd got the social media handles. I had started looking for the name on, like, the domain name on as a website, looking at it on was it?
Like names.co.uk
Yeah,
and
exactly.
like
As a
that. Yeah.
business, and I was doing all. I was like, yeah, on it. And that was the kind of person I was like. So it didn't have room for rest or recovery. So nowadays I do things like I have an Andre day, which is my day to really, like, slow things down and pay attention to what I need in the moment. When I take time off, I take time off,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
off, you know. Like, so for example, I was in Sierra Leone in December, and a lot of that time was spent on the beach and just reflective as well, just allowing myself to think, because I didn't really do that, and to process the things that I do. Um, and I think, yeah, so for me, my burnout experience started from doing too much, just as a general term, but not giving myself space to recover as well as rest. And then you'd have different environmental things that would happen. There were specific moments that created even more pressure, which built up to one specific time when I was definitely burnt out. And for me, it looked like being there's like three main distinguishers of burnout. There's depersonalization, is when you don't feel like yourself. Emotional exhaustion is when you've got no more in your tank to feel or to care. And then you've got reduced sense of personal accomplishment, which means that you basically think that nothing you do matters. And I was experiencing a bit of all three in that space, where I just run out of everything. And it took a while to get there. They say Usually it's about 3 or 6 months-ish to get to a state of burnout if you are to, go, but it can take longer than that. But to come out of it completely sometimes, if you are actually burnt out, because I think there's a lot of people who are stressed, who feel stressed, who think they're stressed, sorry, but are actually burnt out. But there's a lot of people who are burnt out who think they're just stressed because your capacity might be different. But if you're really burnt out, like clinically, it can take up to like 3 years to recover from that, to the point where you're not falling into that cycle again, because it's not just stopping to do this one thing. It's about changing the way you think and changing the way you treat yourself and things like that. That is really where the healing from burnout starts, is when you realize, okay, I need to realign with my values, because by me making these particular decisions, I'm causing myself stress because I don't trust myself anymore. It's by I need to spend more time with the people I love because they're the ones who replenish me. And right now I'm prioritizing work over that, which means I don't have the energy for either anymore. It's things like I need to stop scrolling, because at the moment there's so much negativity going on in the world and making me compare myself and feel depressed because I can't do anything about these catastrophes that are happening everywhere, that I'm falling into this pool of darkness. And I need to break from that. There's different things like that that really actually help recover from burnout, that take time to implement. So yeah, that's my long story short with that.
Oh, that's amazing, because I was also thinking about what symptoms did you have?
Yeah, so me,
Because I'm
like I said, I
hearing,
had
yeah, because I'm hearing people that, they feel quite lethargic. Do you know what I mean?
mm,
They feel quite low in mood and depressed. But what symptoms did you have?
I think the biggest symptom for me, which was a red flag for me and my mum actually, was that I lost my capacity to feel. So anything great happened, didn't feel anything. Terrible things happened, didn't feel anything. Like I was just like flatlined emotionally. And as someone who has, a history of experiencing the full gamut of emotions, I was, I felt nothing. And that was a real red flag for me. I remember there was someone who passed away. I didn't feel anything. And that was, for me, was like a huge red flag. I was like, okay, no, there's something definitely up here. I think that was like the main one that I was like, okay, I need to look at this and figure out what is going on with me. And that's when I realized how far down that burnout road I'd come.
So did you get help to identify that? How did you know that it was burnout?
Um, I think a lot of it was research, and I just started to look for it. But one of the things I would say is I feel like, because obviously I'm a burnout coach, right? So I help people, and there's different levels to it. There's we call it the burnout cycle, right? There's 12 stages. So it's good to kind of have an idea of what you're experiencing so you can see how far down you are. And when you're at the beginning stages, it might be fine. It actually looks like productivity, right? So you're doing a lot of things, like, you're functional, highly, all that kind of stuff. But then there's usually like a point where you're doing too much and you're almost chasing after this level of productivity, right? And then that's when things start to start falling apart. And then you start, comparing yourself to these unrealistic expectations, and, you're not processing what's going on with it. Like, so for example, a lot of the time I'll ask, how long have you been feeling this way? You'd be like, okay, about 3 months. Okay, what was happening around that time? And there'll be some kind of huge event that you haven't processed. And then that would accelerate this movement into this feeling. So for me, um, I was at the earlier stages at first, but I didn't notice. And I kind of like went down this cycle. So once I found it, I was like, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. And one of the things I'd say is, if you're really burnt out, it can get to the point where it's a medical issue. So it's similar to, if you're clinically depressed, sometimes it gets to the point where even all the strategy and stuff may not always help to get you out of that space. Fortunately, I didn't get down to the medical issue level, but it was something where I spoke to coaches, I spoke to therapists, and they just helped me back out of it. And it was just a matter, for me, it was a matter of shifting my mindset and how I was approaching certain things, and then unlocked the physiological and the emotional side of things as well. It's like, what stories was I telling myself when things were happening? How was I using my time in terms of, a friend of mine back in the day said, if you want to see your priorities, look at how you spend your time. Because a lot of people think, my priority is family, my priority is this and that, but then you spend zero time doing that. But then what you actually do is the stuff that's destructive, but you find yourself doing that because you feel like you have to for some reason. So for example, it's about breaking out of that mindset you have to, and taking back control of it and saying, okay, this is what actually is healthy for me, and I'm going to actively implement this into my lifestyle. And sometimes it can feel fake at first, especially when you don't feel like doing it. It's like, nobody feels like going for a run, but once you're finished or you're towards the end, you feel accomplished. You feel like the endorphins running through your body and things like that. Sometimes you have to fake it until you do it, and then once you do it, you actually feel the benefits of it. There's been times where I didn't really want to see anybody, but I knew I needed to, and then it's like, okay, cool, let me spend some time with this person. And by the time I finish with them, I feel light, and I'm like, okay, cool, I need more of this. Cool, let me remember that. But yeah, that was my experience.
Oh, I'm so thank you for sharing that, and sharing a part of you and your journey in terms of how you recovered. Is that right? Am I using the right terminology? How you
Yeah, yeah.
recovered out of burnout, and how you're also
Mm,
empowering others who are going through burnout. So what
mm.
valuable lesson would you share about your particular long story short?
Um, as a lesson, I think just as a something I would say to anybody is just be curious. Like, the world is full of experiences, and I think the older we get, the part, less portion of that pie we tend to do. Like, we kind of fall into habits a lot, and then we can sometimes feel like this is all that life has for me. But just be curious and increase that piece of the pie that you get to experience. Maybe it's about doing something different. Maybe it's about actually being introspective and asking yourself questions. Like, so for me, curiosity is asking without judgment, you know. Um, the without judgment is really important though, because I think we judge ourselves all the time. There's like six critics, inner critics, they say, right? That we're always judging ourselves on different parts of our lives. And it's about trying to quieten that voice so that we can actually see what would help, and sometimes the answer might not be obvious, but it might make huge change in us. Like, some of the stuff I do with some clients and stuff, they're like, why are we doing this? But then afterwards it's like, got it. Because it might not be a logical thing. Sometimes the creative side has to have some energy too.
I love this. So I'm sitting here, I feel like I'm the student. You understand? I'm the student, and I'm reflecting upon, I'm listening to you, but I'm also reflecting upon how I am as an individual, and
Mm,
how I approach things, thinking, yeah, Sophia, you need to slow down on that one then.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Do you know what I say just before we can
mm,
just there was one thing, right, that has shifted the way I've approached coaching people, everything. And it's your self-image, actually. So it's, how do you see yourself? How do you think other people see you? And how do you want other people to see you? And I feel like there's an element of those three that is happening at all the time. And often, like, for me, the ego is the idea we have of ourselves, and we're trying to keep it there. And anything that falls short of that is when the ego is like, hey, you know,
no, 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 not today.
exactly. But it's about creating a healthy image of ourselves that isn't, for example, tied to our productivity and what we do. You know, if our ego is based on how much we make or what job we're in, exactly, for example, and then we lose that, it can have such a detrimental effect on our well-being. And even in the little things, it has an effect on the decisions we make on a day-to-day basis. There was a book I'm reading called Clear Thinking, and it talks about how the big decisions, we get to the big decisions by making small decisions. And so like daily decisions, like what time will I wake up? Will I make my bed in the morning? All these little things, like, and our self-esteem is based on evidence that we can trust ourselves. So that if you're saying you're going to do stuff and then we don't do it, it's like a message to yourself that you can't trust yourself. And that can have a detrimental effect on the bigger things, you know, when they come. Like we don't trust, like, for example, this idea about, okay, there's this job, but I don't feel like I'm worthy. A lot of the time it's because we haven't proved ourselves to be to ourselves. And so taking note of those little things that build up to the big things, and part of it is all connected to who we think we are.
Mm. 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 Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Let's need that to settle. Boy,
Mm.
you know, thing about the decisions as well. Every Monday I go to a class called Fit to Fight. And
Mm.
hey, the decision about going to that class on Fit to Fight, it starts from a week before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
understand? It is the struggle is real. Do you
Mm-hmm.
understand what I mean? But when I get there, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. I can sing in opera. I'm like this, I'm like that. Do you get what I mean? But getting
Yeah.
there, it is a struggle. Why
Mm-hmm.
are we like this, Andre? Why?
Do you know what? It's the pain versus pleasure thing. Like a lot of the time we're thinking about, oh, I have to get out of bed. Oh, it's cold outside. We're thinking about the part that we don't like. So like a really simple thing to focus on is when you're thinking about it, think about that feeling that you know you're going to have and just think about that. Or think about what happens if you keep going over the year, like who you'll be, and focus on that. Because really a lot of the time is, let's say, for example, I'm going to the gym. I'm thinking about how much it's going to hurt my body with each rep. I'm thinking about how cold it is outside. I'm thinking about the journey time. I'm not thinking about how I'm going to feel afterwards, you know, and I know how I'm going to feel afterwards. I know I'm going to feel like I can take on the world, like I'm Atlas with the world on his shoulders, and I can stroll through with my, you know, um, my beach bod and all that kind of stuff, right? If I focus on what I actually want to happen, that is much more likely to give me that positive feeling. And one of the things I would say, which is more like a, um, I don't know what you'd call it, like psychophysical thing, is consider the state we're in when we're thinking about these things. So, for example, have you eaten? Are you well watered? Are you well rested? What is your body position? You know, I find that if I'm thinking about something in a negative way, I will actively think about what the positive thing is, but maybe even put my arms in victory pose or bring my chest out and say out loud and say, I'm going to love this. This is going to be a freaking amazing day. Like changing your state when we're thinking about the thing can really help, because we'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go. Yeah, I'm going to go. Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm going up in about 20 minutes. Oh my gosh, I'm going to go in. Oh, you just feel the way, and that's not going to help you. Sometimes you need to switch your body as well as your mind.
Mm. I love that. And that is so accurate and true, isn't it? And I think a lot of the things that we are not taught this, and these
Mm,
wonderful life skills that I believe even children, do you know what I mean, should
absolutely.
be learning, to build in their resilience and living in this world.
Mm.
So through your journey going through burnout, why did you decide to be a burnout coach? Because you could have just gone through the journey of being, burnt out and doing the work that you need to do so that you can fly and sing again, type of thing.
Yeah.
Why decide to set up your own business doing so?
I think because I got into coaching because it was actually a few friends of mine who said I should look into it because they were doing coaching stuff too. And they didn't know each other. They just happened to message me at a similar kind of time. And they said, you should consider coaching because what I'm learning is what you do naturally. And I did a webinar and I loved it. And I realized the way because you can tell someone who's skilled in an area versus who is gifted, right? Because I feel like we're born with the gift, but then there's a difference between someone who's honed it, right? So this is someone who's like, I don't know how many hours worth of coaching experience. And I did a demonstration on me and it was so transformational. I was like, wow, I want to be able to help people like this. Um, but I didn't have a topic at the time. I just wanted to help people. And I think burnout became a topic when pretty much every client that I spoke to, it somehow found its way into that session. And I was like, oh, this burnout thing just seems to be happening everywhere. Let me just do that. Because I've experienced it, I've gone through it, I know about it. And yeah, I just leaned into it basically. So, and now, and it's very clear. I think people at this point in time, if you haven't heard about burnout, you would have definitely heard the word stress. And so I just lean in with one of those two words. And, you know, usually I can just say a few things that people will be able to be like, oh, I never thought about it like that. And then we're into the conversation.
Also, as I love hearing people's stories and how they sort of like unfolded into what they're doing
Mm.
in terms of empowering and helping and supporting people. But you know, the first, one question that I have not even asked you, what is burnout? What does it mean?
Oh, okay. Yeah, 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 yeah. So I guess, okay. So there's we to explain what burnout is, we got to explain what stress is first. So stress, people have has a bad rep, right? Stress is seen as a negative thing. Stress has a function though. Stress is what helps you keep focused. Stress is what helps you perform. Like there's a graph, I can't remember the name of it, where it says that it's like stress versus performance. If you have too little stress, you have no motivation. You're right. And you're just bored, you're apathetic, you're whatever. If you have too much stress is when you get burnt out. But the perfect amount of stress is when you're in flow state, when you're, you know, you've finally got that click and you're just like, right. That is actually a form of stress too, because stress itself is just, what's the word I'm looking for? It is cortisol and adrenaline in the body, and it's designed for us to tackle a challenge. That's what it's there for. The problem happens when the challenge is complete and the stress is still there. So we call it the stress cycle. You're at rest and then you see a challenge, then you beat the challenge, and once the challenge is over, you're meant to recover back to rest. So the stress, that's the stress cycle. The problem is when the stress cycle isn't complete. And so when you, let's say, for example, you finish your deadline, but you're still scared about what will happen next. You know, you change jobs or move country, but now you're scared about every little thing that happens. Like you're still feeling in stress state, and the cortisol and adrenaline is still in your body. Over time, this becomes toxic to the body physiologically. And so that's when you start to see you have headaches, you have back pains, you have chronic illnesses and things over time. And then that's when you start to get to the point where you're experiencing burnout. So burnout is at the very end of that road. But it's important to give that journey, because I think people just think about burnout and use it as a term willy-nilly. But it really is like a serious issue, especially when you get to the part where it's like chronically burnt out, where it's been like years. And for example, if I was to ask somebody, when was the last time you didn't feel stressed? In this economy, some people are like, I don't know, I must have been about 8 years old, you know?
Yeah, me, five, you know,
Exactly,
my
right?
age.
And so a lot of people are experiencing stress, and it really is an issue, but it's important to distinguish between stress and burnout, because stress you can recover from in a certain way, but burnout is a whole different thing that you need to do. So yeah, burnout is at the very end of that road.
Wow. As I said, I am the student and you are the teacher for this podcast episode. So as we're coming to the end, and I want to thank you so much for that definition, because we will talk about terms, as you said, willy-nilly, and they would use stress
Mm,
and burnout. But really, what does it mean? What is the definition? And for people to know so that they can possibly recognize the signs for themselves and reach out to somebody like you for help
mm.
and having that consultation. So as we're coming to the end, what are the key takeaways would you like people to remember about your long story short?
Um, that I'm awesome.
Yes, you are.
And I say that, right, because I remember having this, there was this book I read, and they were talking about the ego and all this kind of stuff. And they was talking about how there's certain types of people who make themselves a certain level by pushing other people down. And those people are considered like the bad guy. There are other people who make other people high by putting themselves down. And those are people who are considered the good guy, right? But then there's other people who recognize that everybody is just dope and it's completely unrelated to each other. They're completely independent. My ability to be dope is not contingent on who you are. It's literally just by myself, by the fact that I exist, I'm dope. And so when I say I'm awesome, I mean that in the sense of I actually am. And it took a long time for me to be able to say that, therapy and all sorts. But I can say that because I recognize that everybody else is as well, including you listening. Yeah. So if that's one thing you can take away, and by knowing that, it means that you also have the power a lot of the time. The world will convince us that we don't. But actually, there's a lot of things that were within our control that we can do something about. And naturally speaking, there's a lot of things that aren't. But what we end up doing is focusing on the things that aren't in our control and trying to fix those and getting frustrated when it doesn't work, as opposed to accepting those things we can't change and focusing on the ones we can and doing that. Yeah.
Ooh, I mean, I'm just cannot wait for this episode to publish. Andre. Honestly, you have been, oh my gosh, amazing. You are dope. You know what I
Thank
mean?
you.
Yeah, 100%. Do you know what I mean? Even from when we were introduced, I said, oh my gosh, this gentleman, I so definitely would love to connect and,
Definitely.
build, connections and,
Mm,
yeah, and do things together. Do you know what I mean? And make this world a
for
better
sure.
place. Okay. Want to thank you for sharing space with me because I know time is, it's so important,
Mm.
for us all. And thank you for coming on to the Long Story Short podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been
Yeah.
awesome. I love your questions. I love the way you deliver. I've obviously listened to a few of the episodes before, and I already knew I like that casual conversation style that you have. But then it's also like completely covered in value. So yeah, you're able to bring the value out of people by being very natural. So thank you for having me.